Hey everybody, Jason here at TWL, and I am so honored to have Bill Morrison. I said that right, right?
You did.
Who is a legend in comic book illustration, movie posters, stuff like that.
A lot of things art
Lots of
related,
things,
yeah.
art related, yes. And then we have Jason Walter here, who you all know from Time Warp, and is a knows more about comic books than in his little finger than I do in my entire body. So I had to have him come in because he loves his comic books. And, you know, Bill Morrison, of course, was Bongo Comics. So, anyways, thank you, Bill, for coming in.
It's my pleasure.
Yes.
I love this store.
Oh, thank you.
I shop here, and I was just saying, normally I'm walking around, and it's when you have this much to look at, it's hard to see it when you're just walking through the store. But to be able to sit here and just gaze out at it, I'm like, oh, I didn't never notice that, and I didn't see that before. So this is cool.
Yeah, we'll have people come in, and they'll come in like around 10 o'clock, and then I'll notice they're still here at 3. And I'm like, are you doing okay? But you know, they're diggers. They love to dig around and look at things.
Yeah.
But so I always get excited when we have people who love this industry and have contributed to this type of industry, meaning the art you've done and the work you've done throughout the 80s, the 90s, and such. But I'm going to let actually Jason start off with any of the questions that you have, because I know that you have some questions about vintage comics that you wanted to talk to him about.
I would just, as far as it's always fun to meet somebody who is in the profession and somebody that also still has that passion for it as well.
Yeah.
Probably like the easiest one I would think of is like, so about what age were you when you think the comic book bug hit you?
I know exactly what age. I was 7, and the Batman TV show premiered.
Okay.
And I was mesmerized. You know, I was, I don't know why I watched the first episode. I must have, I think I'd seen Batman comics that my cousin had.
Okay.
So I knew the character. And I probably saw promos, you know, commercials in advance. And then, but I was there. I was in front of the TV the night it came on. And it just smacked me between the eyes. I was, you know, from that point on, it was like, I got to have more of this.
Right.
More of this character. So my dad took me to a bookstore in Lincoln Park, Michigan, where I grew up, called Farrah's Bookstore. And it was like a little family bookstore, and they had a couple of comic spinner racks. And I got my first comic with Batman. It wasn't a Batman comic. It was World's Finest, number 165.
Okay.
I remember clearly it had Batman and Superman on the cover as kings. They both had crowns on their heads, and they had a big globe, and they were dividing up the globe with a big sword, and they were angry. One was angry with the other because he was taking a bigger half of the globe.
Too much of it as far as the superpowers going. Well, it's that great age where you still had a little bit of the magic, you still had some of the imagination, the stuff of the Silver Age. Was still kind of like, you know, clinging to where things were being written at that point.
Yeah, and I wasn't a Marvel kid because this store didn't have Marvel comics.
Okay,
they didn't carry them.
Right.
They carried everything else.
Okay.
But no Marvel.
Interesting.
And so I didn't discover Marvel. I saw the stuff on TV, the cartoons, but I didn't really read the comics until I was about 12 or 13.
Okay.
And then that bug hit me.
Right.
Or bit me.
Right.
And I was the right age for, you know, something a little bit more adult, but still.
Well, in my experience as well, it's always one of those, you seem to get into one of, or you're introduced to one of those universes or through some of the characters, or something grabs you, and then later on either something comes up that you just catches your attention. I want to know more about this guy. I can remember discovering the DC stuff later on, and it became just so much pleasure to dig through things and find, well, who is this character? And how obscure is this? And, well, what's the backstory with this one? And I think to a certain degree that becomes sort of like the overarching love interest that you've got in this is the history of it, everything that's come before it, the creators who've done all this stuff, and everything kind of piling up, but you want to know the story.
Yeah.
You know, you want to know why.
Yeah.
Looking back on that, as far as seeing how that kind of caught your attention and dragged you into stuff, do you think that's something that, obviously everything that you appreciate influences your work in some degree or another? Did that have some sort of effect on your later work, or the course that you decided to take, or the way you kind of moved into it?
Well, between Marvel and DC, Batman was my favorite DC character. Spider-Man, my favorite Marvel character. So when I was in high school, that was when I started thinking seriously about being a comic book artist. So yeah, all that stuff totally influenced everything I did. And then when I got into art school at College for Creative Studies in Detroit, I remember, like, I would get an assignment and I would think, how can I, like, adjust this assignment or twist it a little bit to make it a comic book assignment?
Right.
Now, how can I work comic images and comic characters into it?
Okay.
And but about halfway through my school, my 4 years there, I started thinking, you know, as you get closer to graduating, you're thinking, okay, when I graduate, I've got to figure out what I'm doing. Yeah. And I was terrified of moving to New York City. Yeah. And back then you had to get started. You couldn't, you know,
That's where the big two were, everybody that knew anybody.
Yeah, all the publishers were there. There was no internet. Yeah. We didn't even have FedEx, so you couldn't. Right. Like, if you did a job, you know, it might be a week before they get it if you put it in the mail. So, so I knew, you know, I just had this healthy fear of New York based on movies and television shows from the 70s.
Right, exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, everything was about how dangerous and crime-ridden everything is, and I'm sure it, to some extent, it was. But now that I know a lot of artists who grew up there, right, and actually started working for Marvel or DC, they're like, yeah, that was television, or that was the movies. You know, it wasn't that bad. So anyway, I made kind of a shift. I had a teacher named Gary Ciccarelli who was an airbrush artist. Okay. And so he was an illustrator, and he turned me on to the California airbrush look, which was at that time all over the place on album covers, movie posters, greeting cards, and that really inspired me. So I started thinking, wow, California wouldn't be bad. You know, I could, you know, I'm passionate about this stuff that I'm doing now, and I could make a living out there. So that's how I ended up in California. Okay. But all of the comic book stuff, all the pop culture stuff that I grew up with was still with me. And I found that whenever I was doing a job on my own, that's where it went. Okay. That was the subject matter. Like, I did a self-promotion piece early on when I first moved to California, and it was all about Spielberg. And so it was like a portrait of Steven Spielberg, like in a montage surrounded by scenes from all of his movies. Right. And I mean all of his movies, because at that time he had only done like maybe 7 movies, you know, so I could
hugely
feature all of them. But yeah, every time I had a chance, I was doing something that had imagery kind of based on things I grew up with and was inspired by in my youth.
So do you think that is that comic book store still in Allen Park?
No.
Or was it Lincoln Park?
The Farrah's?
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, it's gone. I mean, the building's there, but it's no longer a bookstore.
No longer a bookstore. Yeah. And I know that we'll get more into Bongo Comics in a minute, but your experience is vast. It's not just lays within comic books. It's you. I mean, you've done the cover art for such movies as Voyage of the Rock Aliens, which we happen to watch a preview of, and we're going to watch.
That was my first poster.
That was your very first poster?
Yeah, and I did 2. There was a teaser, and then I guess what they call like a wide release poster. Mm-hmm. Like once the film's out, it's the one that's in the theater lobbies. Right. But the teaser would be like a month before the movie's out.
That's awesome. Yeah. And that was the very first one you did?
Yeah. Oh,
that's awesome. And then you did House and Blood Diner too, didn't you?
Yeah. I did a lot of low-budget horror movies. Yeah. So it's if you remember, it was also on the video box. Yeah. So a lot of people grew up
knowing that image,
just seeing that image in video shops, in Blockbuster Video.
That must feel good because that's almost a legacy. I mean, not just house, of course, but your art. It's going to go on for centuries.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
That's one of the great things about doing what I do is, as long as print exists, that stuff is out there.
And your name will be out there.
Yeah, and now it's on the internet. So you can go to websites where.
How do you think I did my research?
Yeah. But there are people who are just obsessed with 80s movie posters, and they know who I am from that.
From the house. Now, I haven't seen the Blood Diner one, but I feel like I've seen the movie. It's like an 80s horror film, right?
Yeah, the great thing about, the interesting thing about Blood Diner is, so I did the artwork, and it's basically a big neon sign with a spooky looking diner in the background. It's almost like Motel Hell a little bit, but... A little bit.
Kind of.
So it's got a big sign in the foreground. In the background is this creepy looking diner with no lights on, and then kind of scary trees in the background.
Did you see the movie?
Yeah, because whenever we did a poster,
you'd watch a movie.
They would send us a rough cut, and it would have the time code running across the bottom. Usually no music yet.
Yeah. It was just to give you an idea of how to put into your mind.
So we could get information for it would spark ideas for what the poster could be. Weirdly, there's no severed zombie hand in House.
No, I know there's not. I actually, it's one of my favorite movies is House. Yeah. I love the old 80s horror films.
So an art director came up with that and then gave it to me to take it to finish.
So you did these in probably the 80s, the early 80s, right? And then when did you start working on Disney's?
So after the first job I had in Hollywood was BD Fox Advertising, and that's where I did a lot of those early horror posters and
which I love, and
teen sex comedies and everything. Because I was, I'll get to the Disney thing in a second, but because I was new and young and in house, which they didn't have in California, like in Los Angeles. Most of the people who did illustration were freelance.
Yeah.
And when I was out there job hunting, every place I went, I would show my portfolio, and they would say, "Okay, great, give us your your contact info, and if something comes in, we'll call you." And I was like, "Well, I'm trying to move here from Michigan, so I would really like
a job."
A regular job. And this one place saw that I could do retouching, I could do like rough sketches, comps. And they took a chance on me, and they said, you'll just work in-house, and you'll mostly do preliminary stuff or retouching. And then if something comes in that's kind of low budget, we'll throw it to you, because they found they could save money having me do something that wasn't high stakes. It wasn't like a Jack Nicholson movie or something, And they could save money. They could make a lot of money on the job instead of having to hire a expensive freelancer.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean,
so I did a lot
somewhere.
So I did a lot of the stuff that now would go direct to video, or back then it was like direct to the drive-in.
So there's a bunch of your art out there, and that aspect. Is that when you started with Simpsons?
No. So what happened was I went to an illustration studio that was owned by one of my heroes, one of my airbrush heroes. And he saw my work and hired me. And that's where I started doing the Disney work.
The Disney work.
Yeah. So I was doing kind of general advertising. It wasn't really, at first, no movie work. So I kind of left that behind. But then we got a job in the studio to do a teaser poster for Cinderella. Oh. And they were re-releasing the film into theaters, which they did back then a couple of times a year. They would re-release the classics and then put those out on video.
Then pull them and put them in moratorium.
Yeah, for like 10 years, and then from the Disney Vault, here it is again. So I did a teaser for Cinderella. Disney liked it. I did like I mentioned earlier, like a broader image that would be the lobby poster, and that had the Cinderella and the prince and the castle and the mice and everything.
Oh, okay. Did that go? Yeah.
Yeah, the teaser was just the mice carrying a satin pillow with the slipper on it.
Oh, okay.
And a lot of stardust kind of flowing off of it. So that started a whole run of Disney posters.
Oh, cool. What was your first main one? Was it Prince and Pauper?
Well, Cinderella was the first.
First.
Yeah, and then after that, I think the first new one was Oliver and Company.
Oh.
And then it might have been Little Mermaid after that. And then
Controversial cover.
Well, the poster wasn't controversial, but the
cover.
video cassette
cover.
which I also did.
Oh, you did that too?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you do that on purpose?
I did not. But once it was called to my attention, I could not deny the anatomical correctness of the tower. It was like, whoa, yeah, how did I miss that?
But you know what? That copy is probably worth a fortune now.
I see it on eBay frequently, and I don't know what people get for it, but I know people have asked a lot for it.
Well, people ask a lot for stuff on eBay. It's all, you have to look and see what they actually sell for.
Right.
Because you can find, I mean, like on Facebook and on they throw up the black diamond boxes and say they're worth $1 million when they're not.
Yeah.
So. But did you enjoy the Disney work?
Oh yeah, I loved it.
Did you?
Yeah, and The Prince and the Pauper was probably my favorite.
Was it?
Because it was the first time I got to do Mickey, Donald, Goofy, Pluto, Pete.
Classic.
That would have been fun.
Everything, I Peter Pan was another one because that was my favorite Disney film at the time.
Mine too.
And so I loved doing Peter Pan, but when I got to do Mickey Mouse, that was like
almost the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
Well, I would think so. Yes.
Yeah.
Is it was it like trepidatious trying to like sync up art style? As far as that goes, as opposed to looking like, somebody at the state fair doing T-shirts.
Yeah.
Then like, well, I've really got to make this look, and so it's going to be approved. It's going to be taken.
Well, yeah, I took it really seriously, and I tried to put the characters on model.
Yeah.
As much as I could. Ultimately, my pencil drawing went to Disney, and they ran it by some of the animators.
Yeah.
So I did get corrections.
Yeah.
So it looks better on the poster than what I was really
getting your editor's
able
mark
to do
as
at
far
the
as
time.
That goes, right?
Yeah.
Did you feel intimidated doing Mickey for the first time?
Yeah, I did.
you?
I felt like it was, and also, well, not only just doing Mickey, but this was the first Mickey film in a long time, and it was a featurette, so it was like a 20-minute film.
Okay.
So it was longer than a short,
Right.
shorter than a feature, but and so it was like Mickey's back, and it's me presenting Mickey. For the first time in a long time.
That would be
to the
that
world.
would be intimidating.
Yeah, so stuff like that can get in your head, and you try to not think about it.
But you did it, and it turned out great.
I'm really happy with the way it came out. I mean, a lot of that is, like I said, the draw-overs that I got from the animators really made. I don't think they redrew everyone. I think it was just the two Mickeys in the center.
Right.
I think they thought my Goofy and I think they redrew my Donald, but I think they thought my Goofy and Pluto were okay.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm good at drawing Disney dogs.
And I was just going to say, like that's the validation has got to feel good too, as well as that's like another notch in the old gun belt. It's like, well, you do this for a living. Well, yeah, but I've drawn Mickey Mouse for Disney.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
It's a pretty nice feeling.
So did you do more Mickey and Minnie after that one?
Not for movie posters, but later on I did some of the gallery art.
Oh, okay.
So I've done prints.
Oh, that's cool.
I did a based on the Hawaiian Holiday short.
Yes.
That has Mickey, Minnie, Goofy, Donald, all in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
Based on that, I did a print that looks like a travel poster.
Oh.
And so it says, Hawaiian Holiday.
Makes sense.
And and it's just designed like kind of a early 60s.
Could they send you to Hawaii for inspiration?
I wish. But no.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
So how did you meet Matt Groening and get involved with Simpsons?
So Matt, this kind of goes back to Blood Diner.
Okay.
Because the week I was hired at BD Fox, where I did the movie posters, another person was hired as an art director. Her name was Millie Smythe.
Okay.
And Millie was from Portland, Oregon, which is where Matt Groening's from.
Oh, okay.
And she was friends with Matt. I guess they didn't meet up there, but they were put together by a couple of friends who were like, hey, you're both from the same city, and you now live in LA. You should meet each other.
Yeah.
So Millie, because we would, or my company would bring in writers to write copy lines for the posters, like the taglines. Millie suggested Matt because he was funny and he was doing his Life in Hell comic strip.
Oh, okay.
So this is pre-Simpsons.
You're familiar with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so before the Simpsons. And so Matt would come in and screen the films that we were working on campaigns for. And he would, go back to his studio and he would write a couple of pages of copy lines.
Oh, okay.
And then turn them in. And sometimes they would select one, sometimes not. And so the copy line for Blood Diner for my poster was actually written by Matt Groening.
Do you remember what it was?
Yes. It says, first they greet you, then they eat you. And so I always say that was our first collaboration.
That's fine.
But I would see Matt in the hallways sometimes if he was in for a screening.
Yeah.
And so I got to know him a little bit. Not really well. But then when The Simpsons started as a primetime show, 1990, I got a call from Millie, and I hadn't seen her in a couple of years. We'd both kind of gone to, different places. And she said, hey, I'm working with Matt Groening. I don't know if you remember Matt. And then I said, yeah, of course. And she said, well, you've probably seen he's got a show on the air on Fox, The Simpsons, and he's put me in charge of all the merchandise art.
Oh.
So she said, I'm doing approvals for all this merchandise that's starting to come out and about to come out, and there's going to be a ton of it, so we're looking for artists. And she said, I remember from BD Fox that in your spare time you used to draw cartoons just for fun. And I was wondering if that's something you might like to try with The Simpsons.
Cool. Did Matt Groening start it with the Simpsons during the Tracy Ullman run? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So
and then you came in after?
After, but I had seen it on the Tracy Ullman show for like 2 years. And then I saw the Christmas special. So by the time Millie called me, it was probably February of 90. And because I remember the show had only been on the air as a regular primetime show for like maybe 3 weeks.
For 3 weeks.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Versus the 30 years it is.
Yeah. 30 plus.
So the posters behind us, I know you didn't draw, but
Yes.
you came in at this time because they are 89 and 90.
Yeah.
Especially the Batman, the Bartman.
Right.
But you did have a hand in going forward past
Yes.
this on these posters and stuff.
When they brought me in, initially I was doing freelance jobs. So for about 6 months, I did a lot of freelance in addition to my regular work at the Willardson studio where I was doing all the Disney stuff.
Right.
So it got to be a lot. And at one point I talked to Dave Willardson, my boss, and I said, I'm getting all this side work on The Simpsons. Why don't I bring it into the studio and then I'll art direct it, draw as much as I have time for. But then I'm not really moonlighting. You can make money. I can make money. So I did that for a while. And then Millie was getting married.
Okay.
And so I was invited to the wedding and I was in the receiving line. She's standing there in her wedding dress. And, I wish her, you don't say congratulations to the bride, right? You say
No.
to the groom.
To the groom.
So I don't know what I said to her. But her response was, oh, Bill, I want you to meet Matt Groening's lawyer.
Okay.
Okay. So she leaves the receiving line, like drags me over across the room to this woman. And she introduces herself and says, yeah, I'm Matt's attorney, and Millie tells me that you're doing a lot of good work on The Simpsons, and Fox is really happy with what you're doing, and they want you to work for them full time. So if you're interested, let me know what it would take for you to leave your job and just go over and work for Fox. And so I, went home and talked to my wife and came up with a figure. It was probably too low because they said yes right away.
Right. Tends to be the case.
But anyway, it was good. It was a definite pay raise for me. And so I left the Willardson studio and I went to work at Fox, and my job was 2 days a week. I followed Millie around.
Okay.
Because she would come into the licensing and merchandising department at Fox, and there were all these creative executives for different aspects of merchandise.
Right.
So there was apparel, there was housewares, you know, toys and games, all that. And Millie would go from office to office, and these executives would show samples of what the licensees were doing.
Right.
And Millie would give them notes. You know, she would say, "Nope, you can't do this.
So she was
This
the
is
end
off
all say all,
model."
pretty
Yeah.
much.
And so I was to learn her job because there was so much stuff coming out that she couldn't handle it all. So they wanted somebody with a keen eye
Right.
to learn that job. So 2 days a week I did that. The other 3 days I oversaw the other artists who were doing Simpsons merchandise art.
Okay.
There were about 3 of them. They were at Klasky Chupo, the animation studio that originally did the Simpsons. And so I would sit in a tiny little room with them, and we would just do stuff like this all day long.
How fun is that?
Yeah.
Especially when you love to draw and love stuff like that. That leads me to a question. So you saw a lot of merchandise come and go. A lot of merchandise get yes. A lot of merchandise get no.
By the time we saw it, generally the concept was approved.
Okay.
So I didn't see a lot of things just get rejected out of hand.
Okay.
But there were a lot of things that were like, can't use those colors. The characters are off model. We can't have the character saying this.
Right.
Can't have the character doing that kind of thing.
Was there a was there a piece of merchandise or a way something was done that was approved that ended up getting scrapped that you were like, ah?
Wow, that's a great question.
And that you think about from time to time going, gosh, I wish that would have came through.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's so much that I really can't recall
just
anything.
too many of them.
Yeah, but if something comes to mind, I'll...
Yeah, let me know.
Yeah.
Because I know that I would be like, you know, see something, I'd be like, oh, that's cool. And then all of a sudden it never shows up and you're like, whatever happened to
And
that?
that's usually how it happens. A lot of times you work on something and then it doesn't come to be.
Yeah.
Or maybe it does and you just never saw it.
Oh, that's true.
Because sometimes we would get samples.
Right.
And they did this cool thing where they had a storage room for all the samples that would come in.
Oh.
And they did distribution, so you would see like these boxes lined up in the hallway. One would say Matt Groening, one would say James Brooks, one would say Sam Simon. All the important people got samples of everything that came out.
Oh, really?
So when the product was done, samples would come in, and they would put all those things in boxes. But if there were extras, they would put them in this room. And every so often, they would let the employees go in there with a shopping bag.
Really?
Yeah, and they would say, just take whatever you want.
Right.
That's perking Steve's eyes up. He's like, so there are rare things out there.
I actually still have like prototypes of some of the dolls.
Oh, that's cool.
You know,
Just the Simpsons stuff.
Yeah, Simpsons
Oh,
dolls,
wow.
just like the resin castings.
Oh,
of
yeah.
things, stuff like that.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, one time I had an Otto doll that Mattel
Otto
did.
doll.
You know, Otto the bus driver.
Yeah.
They did an Otto doll, and then I don't know what happened to Mattel's program, but it kind of deflated, and a lot of stuff. Actually, now I know the answer to that question. The Otto doll.
The Otto doll.
Yeah.
That's the answer.
Because I had the prototype for that. It was unpainted, but it was cloth and plastic, so his arms were plastic, and his head, and everything else was like cloth body. And yeah, that's one that never came out. I did artwork for action figures for Mattel.
Oh, you did?
Because they had a series. The first series came out, and it was the family plus Bartman plus Nelson.
Mattel put those out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then they were doing a second wave, which was Krusty, Ninja Bart, Baseball Bart, and a couple of other ones. And I did artwork for those.
Oh, awesome.
And then their program died, so I never got to see those come out. Yeah. So those would have been cool.
There's got to be a Simpsons museum in California somewhere. in a Springfield somewhere in
There
California.
used to be a Simpsons store in Westwood.
There was?
Yeah, right outside the in the village, Westwood Village, near the USC campus or UCLA.
UCLA. Been there many times.
And it was only there for like in 1990. It was like that first wave of Simpsons mania, and
when it first,
the store was nothing but Simpsons merchandise.
It's like deja vu because I grew up in that area, and I could have, you never know, I could have been in there. 90s are kind of hazy for me. And I know that working with the Simpsons and working with Matt led to Bongo Comics somewhat. Yes. But real quick, I want to ask, you're from here. You're from Metro Detroit. Metro Detroit. You actually, I saw the one video where you said, "Look, I can see Canada from my window."
Yeah.
Which we can all see Canada when we step outside by the lake.
Yeah.
But,
I live on Lake St. Clair now.
Yeah, and that's actually literally less than a mile behind us.
It's like 5 minutes away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your time in California was in Southern California. Where'd you live?
First, I lived in Beverly Hills. When I first took that job, my wife is an actress.
Oh, okay.
And she was doing a production of Fiddler on the Roof.
Okay.
Here in Detroit, and so the job was at first it was kind of tentative. So they were giving me like a 1 month trial.
Oh, okay.
So I went out there and just stayed on a friend's sofa, and then once they offered the job full time, I had to look for a place to live. My wife wasn't out yet because she wasn't going to be able to come out for another month.
Right. Yeah.
And they said, my boss's wife said, "Well, if you're looking for a place, I have a friend who has a friend who lives in Beverly Hills, and she's looking to rent out the lower part of her house."
Yeah.
So she lived kind of on the side of a hill, so it was like a backyard access, and
yeah.
So for until my wife arrived, I lived there, and then once. I'm really bad at like spatial stuff. You'd think as an artist I would be better, but the place was really tiny, and we already had way too much stuff to fit in this place. So
the friend's lower unit.
Yes.
Yeah.
So once my wife came out and our stuff arrived, it was like this isn't going to work. It's just too small. So we looked for a place in the San Fernando Valley and lived there. For probably about 8 years, and then bought a house in Simi Valley.
In Simi Valley?
Yeah.
I love Simi Valley.
Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in, most of my life was in Oceanside.
Oh.
And La Jolla area.
That's where Millie lived.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
In Oceanside or La Jolla?
Oceanside.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
that's
she would
where
drive
I
up.
graduated high school.
She would drive up twice a week to Fox. And
yeah, that's a drive. My mom worked across from Disney, and we lived in Oceanside, so it was an hour and a half drive up every day. And then Disney was my babysitter. If I had to drive in with her, she just dropped me off at Disney, which that is not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing.
No. So I had friends that lost their homes in this fire, and this tragic fire. And I know they had the big concert last night to help raise money for it and everything. You didn't lose anyone or anything, did you?
Didn't lose anyone, but a very close friend of mine lost her house. She was in the Palisades.
Yeah.
And she was able to save her dog. And
good.
She said a couple of T-shirts and a sweatshirt, just a few things to wear for a couple of days.
Yeah.
And she said everything else is gone.
My mom grew up in Altadena, and my grandparents and everything, and they just watched their childhood burn away. It was awful.
Yeah.
Awful. My heart goes out to everybody there.
It's still devastating.
It is.
I saw a video of my commute to work from Simi Valley to Santa Monica, which is where Bongo ended up being, was mostly a canyon road and then down Pacific Coast Highway. So I saw people driving down, or video that people were taking from dashboard cams or whatever, driving down PCH, and it was unrecognizable. Every so often you'd see a sign and I'd go, "Oh, that was that restaurant." Otherwise you're seeing the ocean, normally, like a lot of that stretch,
Where
you're
all of
seeing-
the
you're
homes
seeing
that were,
houses.
yeah, you couldn't even see the ocean.
Right.
I would go to friends' house that live on that stretch of PCH where the houses are on stilts over the ocean.
Yeah,
And you wouldn't even tell you were next to the ocean if it wasn't for the smell and the salt in the air.
Right.
yeah.
And when they showed people walking down there, and it was completely, I had never seen that view in my life, and I grew up there.
Yeah,
You know, it was
most
crazy.
people haven't. I mean, since probably the 1800s.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's crazy, and most of them will probably rebuild,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Yeah, I hope so.
So Bongo Comics derived from your work with Matt.
Yes, and the way it happened is when Matt made his deal with Fox
Right? Mm-hmm.
for the Tracy Ullman show. So he
Mhm.
was brought in initially because James Brooks saw Life in Hell,
Right.
and he saw that as something he could. They were looking for things they could turn into little bumpers, animated bumpers that would take you in and out of commercial breaks.
You know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So they had a couple.
He's
They,
written some comics. And
I
drawn
know.
some comics.
so they had the Simpsons, and I think they had maybe 2 other things
Uh-huh.
that whenever they would go to a commercial break, you'd get a little bit of animation, and then coming back out of the commercial, you'd have a little bit more, and then
Right.
go back into the sketch
Mhm.
comedy. So James Brooks, producer, was looking for another one
Mhm.
that he could turn into an animated bumper, and he liked Life in Hell, Matt's comic strip. So talked to Matt, brought him in for an interview or for a meeting with Fox executives to pitch Life in Hell as an animated bumper.
Mhm.
And Matt found out 15 minutes before the meeting that if he made this deal, Fox would own Life in Hell.
Right.
Oh.
That was the deal, non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Right.
And so he freaked out, and he said,
Mhm.
you know, this is my baby, this is my comic strip, and I've already got my own merchandise
I don't
happening.
blame
and
him. Yeah,
I don't want to.
absolutely.
I don't want to just give this
Mm-mm.
away. And what if this is on the air for a year and then they still own it? You
Right.
know? So he got some paper and a pencil or a pen, and he sketched out the Simpsons in the waiting room.
Oh.
And he went in and BS'd his way through the meeting. And he said, I know you're expecting a pitch for Life in Hell, my comic strip, but I've been thinking about it, and I've got something even better.
This was while it was on the Tracy Ullman show?
Well, this is before the Tracy Ullman
before.
show.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's just pitching,
His
You
whole
know,
animation
original.
shorts to him.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And they're like, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, here's the characters. It's a modern American family, and here's Homer, here's Bart. He, and introduces the characters, and they were all based on his family because his dad's name is Homer, his mom's name is Margaret.
I did not know that.
Didn't
He has
know
a
that
sister named Maggie, a sister named Lisa.
I did not know that. That's actually an interesting tidbit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Bart is an anagram for brat, which Matt always considered himself kind of a brat.
I was wondering where Matt fell in there.
Yeah. So he didn't want to. He thought it would be too on the nose to
Right.
name a character Matt, so he named
Yeah.
him Bart. So the executives were like, "Well, we really like the humor in Life in Hell," and he said, "Oh, it's going to be the same humor.
Right.
It's subversive, et cetera, et cetera. Same drawing style, same sense of humor,
Yeah.
but your audience is going to relate to it more because it's about people. It's about a family. It's
An
not
average
about
sitcom type of situation.
it's not about two little guys, two twins and fezzes, and it's
Right.
not about a one-eared rabbit.
Mm.
It's going to be more relatable."
Right.
And they said, well, as long as the sense of humor is the same, then okay. And so his lawyer steps in, and she said, because Matt is a cartoonist, I would like to be able to reserve the publishing rights for him because he might want to do a comic strip or something like that. And they said, yeah, because at that time nobody imagined
Yeah.
what The Simpsons would
Right.
be.
Right.
They had made a similar mistake with Star Wars
Oh.
Yeah.
because they gave George Lucas the merchandise rights.
Right.
Because
Oh, yeah.
They didn't
That I
think it was
knew.
gonna do
Actually, that I
anything,
knew.
yeah.
Yep.
because they didn't think Star
It
Wars was going to
do
be anything.
nothing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So you would think, having learned that lesson, that
They
they would
wouldn't do
now,
this.
but they were like, publishing, who cares?
Right.
So because of that, Matt was able to start Bongo.
Ah.
and he had the publishing rights. He'd been courted by Marvel and probably DC and other publishers to do a Simpsons comic
Right.
from 1990 all the way through to 93. And he kept saying no because he thought, if I'm going to do a comic, I want to have more control over it.
So
I want to be hands-on.
The Simpsons comics are only a 3-year span?
No, what happened was he made a deal with Welsh Publishing, who did a magazine called Simpsons Illustrated.
Okay.
And there was a comic section in the magazine. And it expanded every issue. So every issue, that, you know, first one, it was just a one-page.
Right.
And I drew the first comic strip, and it was a Krusty the Clown, just a half a page. And the bottom was Hey Arnold, which ended up becoming a show on Nickelodeon. The guy who created Hey Arnold was, I think at the time, maybe dating Matt's sister, Lisa.
Oh.
But they ended up getting married. So it was kind of a, you know,
it's like a
family thing.
Family thing. I think he invited him to do his comic strip in the Simpsons Illustrated magazine.
Did you watch that? Did you
I know
those up
of
in
it,
the 90s and watch those? Or
not as much, but yeah, I'm definitely aware of them. Knowing that's what was around.
Yeah.
Because I know you've been in comics all your life. So. Yeah.
So the comic section expanded, you know, like 3 pages, then 5, and then eventually 10. So for 2 years we did the magazine. At the end of the first year we did an annual, which was a 3D issue.
Oh.
And had the glasses and everything. The whole thing was 3D, even the ads, everything was 3D.
We had a Simpson. Did we have that at one point? We did have
went
that
up
at
for
one
auction.
point. Yep. Okay.
I'll have to bring you one. I have extras.
Yeah, and we'd keep it. We wouldn't sell it.
So approaching the end of the second year, Matt and Steve Vance, who was the editor, were thinking about, well, what can we do for the annual that's, you know, another fun, gimmicky kind of thing. And by that time, we were having so much fun with the comics that somebody said, why don't we just do an all-comics issue?
Yeah.
And everyone liked that idea. And then the idea came up to make it look like a comic book. Instead of magazine size, it would be comic book size. And then they went even further and changed the title of it. So they called it Simpsons Comics and Stories as an homage to Disney Comics and Stories. The classic Donald Duck,
cool.
Uncle Scrooge comic that we all grew up with. So that became the first Simpsons comic book.
Okay.
But it was not Bongo. Bongo didn't exist yet.
Okay.
So off the success of that, because it was huge, that gave Matt the confidence to start to do what he always wanted to do, which was start his own company.
Oh, good. And that's when Bongo.
Yeah. So we launched Bongo in the Comics and Stories came out in February of '93, and then we launched Bongo in November of '93.
Well, that's cool.
With Simpsons Comics, Bartman, Radioactive Man, and Itchy and Scratchy.
Itchy and Scratchy.
Yeah, but because Matt owned the publishing and he was already doing calendars and books, just under his Matt Groening Productions banner, eventually that all got brought into Bongo. So Bongo became not just a comic publisher, but
Just
a publisher of any publishing aspect of The Simpsons.
Question kind of ties in. If you had to pick an era of comic books that is your favorite, you know, gold and silver, bronze, anything like that, what would be your favorite?
Silver.
Silver, why?
Yeah, just because that's the era I grew up with.
Yeah.
So it has the most nostalgic tug, you know, for me.
Which one's yours?
That's a really good question. Since I came into everything more like with the Bronze Age, the 80s stuff, where things were, the idea being that the comics audience had shifted, and so the writers were the ones who'd been reading the stuff coming up, and now we're trying to interject a bit more mature stuff to it, or a bit more social conscious stuff to it as well. That era, I think, for me, is what really got me into it, piqued my interest, and then from there that latches into the whole, these characters have got like a 30 to 60 year history, and what else, like I was talking about, where can you go back to find this stuff, or what writers are bringing in old elements, that kind of thing to it as well. I was going to say that's something else that we were talking about, was that not only with the work that you're doing, but you're also a big collector, so the vintage merchandise and that type of stuff. Is that also the draw in terms of, I remember these from playing with them or seeing them, but never actually getting to buy them?
Yes.
That kind of pulls into,
absolutely.
And I think that's true for most collectors or most people who come up with stuff. We always talk about people are trying to buy back parts of their childhood when it comes to that.
And I do, you know, over time, actually kind of early on, I got into the Golden Age.
Yeah.
Because in the early 70s, they started doing the 25-cent, 48-page comics. And they would have a brand new story, but then they'd have a couple of reprints from the Golden Age.
Right.
And that's where I was introduced to, you know, Golden Age Batman, and Green Lantern, and all those characters.
Is Batman your favorite?
Batman is my favorite.
Yeah. Even in comic books?
I can't escape it. It's like a disease.
It's like a disease.
It's like a terminal sickness that I have never been able to get rid of.
Where does Futurama fall into all of this? Because I'm going to tell you, Futurama is one of our favorite shows.
Okay.
And I know you've done a lot of work with Futurama. Where does that fall into the timeline?
Okay, so in, I think it was 1997, Matt came into my office one day and he said, I'm working on a new show idea and I need some help kind of visualizing it. And he had a studio at that time kind of near where Bongo ended up being, but at the time Bongo was in Century City, and his studio was out in Santa Monica. And he said, so can you come out to Santa Monica like after hours for a couple of weeks and just help me, you know, figure out the look of this.
Right.
And he also brought in Millie Smythe, and Dale Hendrickson, who was a Simpsons character designer.
Okay.
And also from up in Canada, I'm blanking on the guy's name now, but there was an artist in Canada, Dave Cooper, who did a lot of background designs and worked on the Planet Express ship.
Oh, okay.
So initially Matt didn't have any drawings, and he would give us just kind of sentences or paragraphs about a character, and he kind of, you know, explained the concept, and he said, you know, it's kind of like Woody Allen's Sleeper, where a character from our time period gets frozen and then he wakes up 1,000 years from now and everything's different.
Like Idiocracy.
And he's like our way into this weird universe. Right. And so he described Fry as just, you know, a delivery boy, kind of a slacker from our time period. Leela was a Cyclops, martial artist who's also the pilot of the Planet Express ship. So just very bare bones information. Right. And then we would start drawing in his style what we thought those characters might look like. And there's a new book out called The Art of Futurama.
Really?
Yeah. I'll bring you a copy.
Yeah, because I do love Futurama. It's one of my favorite ones.
I'll drop a copy off this weekend.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah, I just got in my samples.
Did you draw? Did you do it?
My work is in it.
Your work is in it. Okay.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
So there's a lot of, in the book, there's a lot of early drawings, and it's like, this is what we were thinking for Leela. And it's like, you know, I have one drawing where she had fangs and a tail.
Oh, really?
And her hands were just like two long fingers and a thumb, you know.
Like the three.
Yeah. Yeah, just weird stuff.
That's awesome.
And but what would happen was we would do a drawing, give it to Matt, and he would look at it, and it was almost like we were helping him figure out what he wanted by seeing sometimes what he didn't want.
Right. Well, that makes sense.
So he would look at the drawing and go, no, that's not right. I wasn't thinking that. Oh, but I like the hair.
Right. So
you know, and then
build
he would,
it up.
Yeah. And then he would do a sketch and then hand it back to us. How about something more like this? And then, you know, I would do a drawing based on his drawing, and it would go back and forth a little bit until it was refined into the final.
And he said, I love it.
Yeah. So once we got all the main cast done and some background designs, you know, props and things like that, he did his pitch to Fox. So we made up, you know, big presentation boards, and then he went into Fox and, you know, just wowed them, and they gave him a bunch of money and offices and said, do it.
I wish it was still on TV. It's on, I think, you can stream it.
It's on Hulu.
Hulu.
Yeah. It came back this year.
Thank
Or last year. It
goodness.
came back last year with new episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of just went back to my normal duties at Bongo.
Right.
And then Matt said to Fox, they were setting him up with office space.
Right.
And the office space included space for writers, producers, casting directors. So they had like a whole floor of the Fox Sports Building.
Right.
On Sepulveda near Wilshire, if you know.
Yeah, I know exactly where it is.
It's near the big government building that
Yeah.
looks kind of blurry at night because of we always call it the blurry building.
Because of the way that it's
the way the light's diffused from like louvers or something.
It's been a while since I've been down in Wilshire. I got to remember the exact building, but I know Wilshire and
so it's right near there. And they, so Matt said, I want space for Bongo so that I don't have to drive around town all the time when I have to meet with Bongo people. So we moved in there, and because the producers knew that I had worked on the development, whenever they needed artwork that it was either, some design, Rough Draft was the animation studio. So like maybe something Rough Draft was doing wasn't quite working, or they were just overwhelmed and they needed extra hands, they would come down to my office and say, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you design some celebrity heads in jars for the pilot or whatever? And after a while, it got to be like a second job that I wasn't getting paid for. So I went to one of the producers and I said, now don't get me wrong, I'm having a blast like working on the show. I love it, but it's a lot, and I kind of feel like I should officially be working on the show. And they agreed, and so they gave me a salary, and they gave me a title, which weirdly they let me choose. Because they didn't have a position.
Official.
There wasn't like a position open that I was filling. So they said, well, what should your title be?
What'd you pick?
And well, first I just said character designer because that's mostly what I do. And the producer was like, that'll ruffle feathers at Rough Draft because they have a character design department. If you get a separate credit, it's going to be a whole thing.
Right.
So I said, well, I don't know. And I'm trying to think. I'm sitting there, and the producer said, how about art director?
Oh, there you go.
And I said, sure. And I'm thinking, that sounds better than character designer. That sounds more important. So they made me the art director. But for most of my time on the show, the first 4 years, I was really a designer.
Right.
But Millie was, the job that she did was really the art director. Her title was co-producer.
Right.
But she was really doing the job of an art director.
Right.
And so when Millie got pregnant and went on maternity leave, I became the art director. Right? I took over her duties.
Right.
So I officially, even though I was already art director, I actually started doing that job.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you're here now. You live back here in Michigan. And are you teaching the next generation? You are. So you went back to your alma mater?
Yeah.
Awesome.
I went to the College for Creative Studies for 4 years, as I mentioned. And when I came back, I've gotten to the point in my life where I feel like I've done a lot of things. I've had a lot of experiences. I have a lot of knowledge. And for some people, there's just like an overwhelming urge to pass that on.
Right. Yeah.
Not everybody has that, but the people that do become teachers because they just,
because they want to share their abilities.
Yeah, it feels like it's just a need that you have to pass it on. So,
right.
So I started talking to some people at the school, and they had me do a workshop, and they liked what I did for the workshop.
Awesome.
And they offered me some classes, so I'm an adjunct professor.
Oh, excellent.
I am going to, Steve, I can't read your writing. No. What was the origins of Smithers being gay? Was it from the beginning and...
Hinted at.
What?
hinted at.
And hinted at.
Oh, okay. Smithers, in the like if you see the first appearance of Smithers, not only is he not, I mean, there's nothing about him that where you really think he's gay,
Right.
but he was also not white or not yellow.
Or not yellow.
Yeah, in the very first time you see him, there's a school tour going on at the power plant, and he's got like very brown skin and kind of black hair, I think. And
would that be in the 90s, like within the first season?
Yeah, probably in the first season.
Okay.
And there were
I'm gonna go back and
yeah, and there were characters like that who were just kind of one-off characters. But then, you know, a writer would say, "Oh, I'm gonna use this guy, who we had in this episode, and I'm gonna give him a bit in the thing I'm writing." And then you would see things get expanded, like Comic Book Guy. He was supposed to just be a one-off character.
Episode. Right.
So I think Smithers being gay, I don't know if that was their original idea.
Right. It just morphed in.
But when they started really using him, not just as kind of a tour guide at the power plant, but as Burns' assistant, and they made him kind of a sycophant. And you got the idea that it's almost like the character on 30 Rock, Jack Donaghy's assistant.
Yes.
Kind of like that, where he's just so interested in doing his job and pleasing his boss that you start to get the idea that there's a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
And
oh yes, okay, the one at the desk who worships him.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That one. I'm thinking the other one.
So I think it was like an evolutionary thing. So first it was just like he's very devoted to Mr. Burns, and maybe a little too devoted.
Becomes obsessed.
Very kind of obsessive, and then I don't know where the episode was where I first started thinking, oh, I think he's got a thing for Mr. Burns. But I know for me it wasn't like immediate.
Right.
It was probably a couple seasons in.
A character build.
And I started thinking, oh yeah, he's definitely gay.
When's the last time you worked on Simpsons?
Just recently I did.
Oh, really?
I can't talk about the most recent thing because they haven't announced it yet.
Yeah.
But Jack's.
But you're still active with them.
Yeah. So you know Jack's Pacific, the toy company.
Yeah.
So I did the box art, the packaging for King Homer.
Oh, awesome.
So they did like an 18-inch plush and plastic King Homer doll.
Cool.
And the box art is really fun. They whoever designed it did a great job, but I did the illustration for that. And
so we're still seeing your stuff come out, which is good.
And there's a new one also from Jack's that I don't know. They should be announcing it anytime. Yeah.
So I know Bongo Comics lasted for 9 years, 10 years.
No, Bongo was from '93 to 2018.
18. Oh, wrote the wrong numbers down. So what came to the end of Bongo?
Well, I was gone by then. So
were you gone?
I was at Mad Magazine.
Oh, that's right. I didn't know that you were at Mad Magazine.
Yeah.
We have some Mads, but they're not when you were there.
Oh, well.
Those are way too old.
Let's see what you got. Yeah.
That's not even Mad.
Oh yeah, this is from the '80s.
Yeah.
But I'm a Mad collector and fan, so I've got Mads going all the way back.
Yeah. So it must have been great when you got to work with them.
Oh my God,
I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah. Well, the way that happened was I left Bongo actually to work on Disenchantment.
Okay.
Matt Groening's Netflix show.
Yeah.
And so I worked on development for that, and then I was on the first season, and I found out once he made his deal with Netflix, I mean, I was being paid by Matt, and I was still getting the same salary I had at Bongo. Once he made the deal with Netflix, everybody was now going to be paid by Netflix.
Oh.
And so I got a call from one of the lawyers, and they said, we're sending an agreement over that you need to sign for Netflix, and also, by the way, they had to adjust your salary.
Oh.
And I said, okay, like
Hopefully up.
yeah. That was my first question.
Yeah.
Hopefully
They
up.
said no, they had to shave. They had to shave it a little bit.
Oh.
And I
okay.
said, really? Well, like how much?
Uh-huh.
And they said, well, you'll see. It's
We'll
in
talk.
the agreement.
Yeah.
Look it over and tell us what you think. So I looked it over, and it ended up being